Heartbeat Podcast, a podcast about health, politics, and society. Pancho Molongeni here with your fourth episode of Heartbeat Podcast. When you think of human rights, I'm sure the ability to move around freely, your right to bodily autonomy, and your right to basically decide where you want to live and what you want to do come to mind. Now, since the state of emergency began in Namibia in March, we have seen that many of these rights have been curtailed. This is why we're going to speak about human rights. For this episode, join us as we talk to Regional Commander of the Commerce Region, Commissioner Joseph Shikongo, about a particular case that involved human rights and the public health. Then we will turn to Tony Hancock, who is the Director of Legal Assistance Center here in Namibia, a not-for-profit social justice law firm. So stay tuned for these and more. Welcome back to Heartbeat Podcast. Let us first listen to our Word on the Street segment. If people who have been failing to social distance and they have symptoms and they refuse to test, do they still have a right to say no, or they must test?
They have the right to say no, but they should be explained why they should test.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was Word on the Street. Now we're going to turn to our interview with the Regional Commander, Commissioner Joseph Shikongo of the Namibian Police. Good afternoon, Regional Commander for the Commerce Region, Joseph Shikongo.
Good afternoon.
I am very curious to know about the patient who crossed the Orange River and made their way to Windhoek and was finally apprehended at 77 Independence apartment building. Can you please elaborate on that particular case? How did the case present, and did they immediately test for COVID-19, or was there some resistance?
Yes, good afternoon once more again. Upon arriving in Namibia at the Namibian side, he was again assisted by other people that actually took him up all the way up to Windhoek. So he ended up on Windhoek. But based on the information we got from our sister region, in Karas region, we got information that there's somebody who sneaked into the city through an authorized area, and then we started with an operation. That operation started on the 13th of June 2020. But because of insufficient information, we had to suspend temporarily. We had to suspend the operation on that particular evening. However, we continued the operation on Sunday, and we were able to get more information. As we tried to make more contact to find out how did he get in and all that. But then on the afternoon of the 14th, which was Sunday, so this very particular person was found at an apartment where he booked himself for about 5 days. And then we confronted him, confirming through the passport that the passport was not stamped. And then from there, we explained to him the implication of getting into a given country in another country without cleared by immigration, which of course he understood very well. And then we actually asked his cooperation, because we consider South Africa to be a risk area in terms of COVID-19.
Of course.
And we explained to him very well that since you are coming from epicenter of COVID-19, you need to be tested. So we are making an arrangement with the doctors to come and swab you.
What was his response?
The response in terms of swabbing, he actually made it clear that he was not going to be swabbed. But then that did not deter us as a law enforcement. We made already contact with the doctors, the swabbing team. The swabbing team arrived And upon arriving, we handed over the person to the medical officials or the doctors to talk to him. And we allow him sometimes for them to talk to him. And upon that time, he made it very clear that he was not going to be swapped unless the police had to kill him. And then we made it clear that no, we are not here to kill anybody. The most important is for our own safety and for the safety of our community. So that we allowed the doctor to talk to him. The doctor tried to convince him. And at that particular time, the doctor had to call the police to come and just to talk to him again, because they needed to swap him. As a result of that, indeed, he became violent. And after he became violent, we instructed the officers that he should be handicapped, because we have the handicaps, so he was handicapped.
Violent towards the doctors?
Well, he did not attack any of the doctors, but the way he spoke to the doctors and to everybody actually demonstrated that the guy was not willing to do anything. And the doctors at some point they were even saying, no, maybe we will just leave. But I think leaving him, it was not in the interest of security, it was not in the interest of the safety of our community, so he needed to be tested. So after I handicapped him, I think the handicap was a little bit honor him, and he said, no, I'm very sorry, so you guys, you needed to release the handicap a bit, so that I can perhaps come to a level of cooperation. So it was at that point that the doctor had actually to test him. So he was tested. After tested him, we unhandicapped him, and then we took him out, and then obviously we informed him that he was arrested because he's an illegal immigrant.
Right.
And then we were going to conduct the immigration to come and charge him in terms of the Immigration Act. So that's basically happened. And then we took him, we further talked to him. I had even to put some police officers to be with him in the ambulance. He was taken by the ambulance from 77, and then he was taken to the airport. So after he was taken to the airport, because he's an illegal immigrant and not knowing by his status by then, so he was detained at our isolation cells at Osakutako. That's where he was detained in that particular night. And then in the next, which was on the 15th Monday, late in the evening, his result came out. And we were told his results were positive on COVID-19. And from that process, that's the time when we handed him officially to the Ministry of Health and Social Services to handle it, because we don't handle people that are positive. So the Ministry of Health have to take responsibility of handling him, because by then he was considered probably as a patient.
So did he avail himself for swabbing in the presence of police?
Yes, he did. He did, yes.
Okay. So thank you so much, Regional Commander, Commissioner Joseph Shikongo.
It is my pleasure. And the other information I should give you is that this patient is fine. Mm-hmm. And perhaps did not develop any symptom up to now. And there are people that are visiting, there are nurses that are visiting, and we are in communication with the nurses. And he's doing very well. We are also in contact with our officers who are at the airport. They visit him regularly, so he's doing well.
So he's still isolated at the airport?
He is still in isolation under the care of both the police and the Ministry of Health and Social Services. And he's doing very well.
Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure.
A very insightful interview there with Regional Commander Joseph Shikongo raises a lot of important questions. For this reason, we're now going to turn to Tony Hancock, a lawyer and director of the Legal Assistance Center here in Namibia. Welcome to all listeners. It is my pleasure to introduce to you on this episode 4 of Heartbeat Podcast, Tony Hancock, who is the director of the Legal Assistance Center. Good afternoon, Tony.
Hello, Pancho.
As you all know, COVID-19 has brought in a sobering reality of countries having to mitigate the pandemic And that has meant that a lot of restrictions have been placed on people, so much so that our usual rights are curtailed. And in this context, it's important to speak about human rights and how they intersect with public health.
Okay, for me, it always has been that the right to dignity is the overarching right, okay, for everybody. Now, although we don't deal specifically with the right to health as such in the Constitution, we do, of course, have it in terms of our international covenants that we've acceded to. I think the main things when you deal with something like COVID-19, and let me just say to you, this is absolutely unprecedented. And I don't think there's an answer that one can give that's definite, because we don't really know what the fallout is going to be. But the main rights to me would be the right to physical integrity. You can be moved around without your knowledge or without your permission. And then, of course, freedom of movement. Your freedom of movement can be curtailed in terms of the towns you can go in, but also personally.
So those two human rights can be curtailed in the pandemic.
Those would be the big ones. I think you can talk of a lot of other issues like privacy and so on, but in general, I think those would be the big ones. And I think there also has to be some kind of line between the right to access healthcare and public health, because at the end of the day, if you don't go ahead with the public health issues, you're going to possibly have an epidemic that's going to affect not only the hospitals and infrastructure, but so doing other people's right to health care.
And just to clarify, Tony, are you saying the right to dignity is the one that should not be at all infringed upon?
Yeah, I mean, that for me is, and we have conversations about that, but my personal view is you have to deal with people in a dignified manner.
Absolutely.
Within that context, obviously.
And in that respect, we will now cut to an insert describing the particular case of case 33. So now, Tony, having listened to the insert, I wanted to actually ask you, first of all, to what extent was the man coerced into testing for COVID-19?
It's very difficult to say that. Obviously, you're going to get this information after the fact. At that point in time, it appears to me that the situation as a whole was unprecedented. They had this information, the police, I think they probably were heavy-handed in the sense that I don't think it was necessary to put him in handcuffs and so on, because really you should be able to use minimum force in order to get someone like that. And I do think that would be the issue. I think that they should have used minimum force, but I think they do need to do that. And I think coercion is one thing. Having to have someone tested because it's a public health emergency is another. Options would probably have been to place him into quarantine as opposed to testing him at that point in time. But at the end of the day, one also has to look at resources. So you're continuously going to test someone, which is what is necessary at this point in time. Unfortunately, I think he placed himself in a little bit of a situation himself, because he came into the country without following the proper channels. Now, we all know at this point in time, it is scary. And so as we are scared, so the police are scared. And in terms, I think that they are probably afraid that if they don't act,
yes,
I wouldn't say heavy-handedly, but really make a point, that it would be not just for them, but in general for the country, it would be a huge issue.
And in the past, with the pandemic that we know as HIV and AIDS, we couldn't actually test anyone without their consent. What would you say regarding COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, 100% it's the same thing. You shouldn't be able to test without consent. But this kind of pandemic, you actually need to keep people separated, because we see how it is transmitted. Honestly, at the end of the day, we don't even know how far that's going to go. We get information every second day from different sources about how it's going to be transmitted. So we might be absolutely wrong in terms of how it actually affects the human body, etc., etc. But at this point in time, it is important to put such person into quarantine. I don't think you should do it in a way that hurts his rights to dignity. I don't want to be lying down somewhere with handcuffs. Not that I'm saying he did. They could have used less force.
Absolutely.
I'm absolutely not sure, obviously, what he did. They've got all sorts of stories about he ran and so on. I mean, I don't know how many people, police officers were even there.
Exactly.
So
And
obviously, least force, and then you can't do it without someone's permission.
So, as a follow-up question, we know that when COVID-19 was declared as a pandemic, many countries, or actually even before that, imposed border restrictions. And for countries such as Australia, that's very easy, they're an island. But in countries in the developing world, especially in Africa, we know there would be many illegal crossings. And actually the government in Botswana mentioned that there would be a lot of illegal crossings, and actually called on SADC member states to show compassion. So how does the COVID-19 crisis change how states should deal with irregular migrants?
I don't think it's of necessity that they should deal with them any differently. It's just that they should deal with them in ways that address the public health issue right now. That doesn't mean that you need to be thrown around or you need to have your dignity, taken away from you. There are obviously limits. There's always a line. And it is a fact that we are going to have this. And at the end of the day, I don't want to say we are all African, but we are. And we have to deal with it in that manner. And that's why I get a little bit annoyed when people say, well, we've sort of, we've cut off and we've closed off this and that country and it's all that easy. It's not that easy for us. And it is reality, not just now, but in general. So I think that it's unprecedented, but we need to remember that people are the same wherever, whether they have COVID, whether they don't have COVID, and they need to be treated with respect.
What are some of the conventions or rights that irregular migrants have? Are they just to be treated as criminals with contempt, or do they have any rights at all?
No, of course they're not to be treated as criminals. And I mean, it's like many of the migrants that come through, it's economic based. They have no choice whatsoever. Many of them are trying to access refugee status. There's all sorts of things. And of course we know that we've had this not conversation, but this relationship with other countries in the region. So you are always going to have to get that cross-border movement. The issue is just how do you deal with these people? And this heavy-handedness cannot be part of that.
Thank you. And as a closing, I wanted you to ask, if you were to give a closing statement, when people ask, well, how do we do this without limiting human rights? Obviously, some human rights will have to go away in order to deal with the effects of the pandemic and mitigate for the spread. What do you have to say to that?
How do we do it is one thing. We have got a state of emergency. In terms of that, there are regulations in place that enforce certain things. Can they be done? I mean, you can go to jail basically and be charged. There's always going to be a line. I think it is a public health emergency. We need to look at it in that way. It's something that we've never dealt with before. So try to work with each other, I think, in terms of human rights. Yes, they are going to be curtailed. That is a fact. That is in terms of the state of emergency. And it's because of this unprecedented health situation. But all I can say is people need to be treated with dignity at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to our 4th episode of Heartbeat Podcast. In this time of public health crisis, we really need to advance the protection of health facilities, patients, and health workers. But we also need to ensure that we mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic as much as possible. For Heartbeat Podcast, this is Pancho Molongeni signing off.